everybody. Welcome to the Guitar Department. I'm your host, Joe Alton. On this episode, we're going to talk about how to play the song I was just playing, Bad Moon Rising by Creedence Clearwater Revival. We're going to take a look at some tips on how to play bar chords. Bar chords are notoriously tricky to get through, so I'm going to offer you up some tips on how to play some bar chords. We're going to have our lick of the week with a special guest this week. Stay tuned for that. And then we've got an extended version of our tone zone. We're going to talk a little bit about our pedal of the week and then how it stacks up with a few of the other ones that we've had for our pedal of the week. Welcome to the Guitar Department. The song Bad Moon Rising by CCR, Creedence Clearwater Revival, has 3 chords in it. And they are D, A, and G. Now, the way John Fogerty from CCR plays, you don't necessarily have to play each chord with each strum, but we're going to talk about the strum patterns that you would need to play the song and how to get through these chords. Now, to begin with, we'll cover just the chords themselves. A D chord is played with 3 fingers. Your pointer finger goes on the 2nd fret of the the 3rd string on what's called an A. And we put our 2nd finger on the bottom string, the high E string, also on the 2nd fret. That's on an F sharp. And in the middle, in between those two, on the 3rd fret, on the 2nd string, we've got our ring finger or 3rd finger playing a D. So, and then we're going to strum from the 4th string, the D string, all the way down to the bottom. So that's your D chord. Your A chord is going to be the same 3 fingers. They will all be on the 2nd fret this time. Your first finger, pointer finger, is going to go on the 4th string, 2nd fret. Middle finger will go directly underneath that on the 3rd string, 2nd fret. And the ring finger, or 3rd finger, will go on the 2nd string, 2nd fret. So they're all just sort of in a row here. And you'll notice there's a little bit of an issue with that. Ideally, you'll have your fingers as close to the fret as you can get them, but the pointer finger, in this case, sort of gets pushed off to the back. And if you're having troubles with making that note, the 4th string note, ring out, you can hear it's a little bit buzzy. I'm doing that on purpose, but to demonstrate, you might get a sound like that out of it. My recommendation is to switch the fingers up and play without the pointer finger. Put your middle finger where your pointer finger was, your ring finger where your middle finger was, and then use your pinky finger on the 2nd fret of the 2nd string. And that gives you a little bit more room to squeeze that middle finger into the place where the first finger would have been. It's still quite a ways away, but the middle finger is pretty strong. And then you strum from the 5th string all the way down to the bottom. And then we have our G chord. This one's tricky also. So we're going to put our middle finger on the top string on the 3rd fret, pointer finger on the 2nd fret of the 5th string. The next 2 strings will be open. And then way down on the 2nd string, you're going to put your 3rd finger on the 3rd fret and pinky finger just below that, also on the 3rd fret. So you've got 3rd fret, 2nd fret, open, open, and then 3rd fret, 3rd fret. And we're going to strum all 6 of those. The intro and the verse to this song are essentially the same part. And we're going to start with a D chord. I'm going to strum it twice, downstroke. And you'll notice that I stopped the chord after that first strum. I did that mostly with my left hand by releasing the pressure on the strings and then squeezing again when I had that 2nd strum. What follows that is an upstroke, a downstroke, and a 2nd upstroke. So the whole measure goes like that. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and at that point, we're going to switch the chord. We're going to move to an A chord, which you are just going to strum downstroke twice, and then to the G chord for 2 more strums. And then you're back to the D chord for 2 whole measures using the pattern that we used for the first D chord. Down, down, up, down, up. Now, the reason we go up, down, up, by the way, is because your hand is supposed to keep a pendulum motion the entire time. notice the right hand just moves down, up, down, up, down, up the entire time in that same rhythm, whether I'm hitting the strings or not. And I only have one downstroke where I'm not hitting the strings, but it's important that you fake that downstroke and move your hand downward so that the rhythm stays nice and in tempo. That'll help you keep that tempo steady as you move on and keep you from rushing or dragging too much. So that's our verse. D, A, G, D, and again D. Then repeat. So that'll carry you through the entire verse section of the song and all of the subsequent verses. When we hit the chorus part, the "Don't Come Around Tonight," you're going to start with a G chord. We're going to keep the same strum pattern, that down, down, up, or 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're just going to put the chords in their proper places. And that's pretty simple. We're going to do a G for 2 measures. Then we switch to D. And then we're going to go A, G, D. So once again, that was the G chord for 2 measures, or 2 times through the strum pattern, the D chord for 2 measures, or 2 times through the strum pattern, and then it is A for 1, G for 1, and then 2 more of D. G, D, A, G, D. And then back to the verse. Now you notice I sped up a little bit there. The song is actually played much faster than I'm playing it. One last thing that I want to point out there, I did this when I just played it just now. I sort of cheated on the A, and this is very much in the style of CCR and John Fogerty. Instead of playing the A with my 1st, 2nd, and 3rd fingers, or with my 2nd, 3rd, and 4th fingers, I'm going to leave off the high E string note altogether. I'm just not going to play it. I'm just going to flatten one finger across all of the 2s that I need for the chord. And you end up playing the 5th string, 4th, 3rd, and 2nd string, and muting that bottom string, which you can hear right now, but in the strum, you don't really hear it. So that's another option as to how to play the A chord. Alright, at this time I'd like to take a second to talk about bar chords. If you've been playing for a little while but you still consider yourself a beginner, you might have your open chords down pretty well, but still be sort of mystified on how to play bar chords. So let's take a deep dive here for a second. First of all, a bar chord is, by definition, when you flatten your finger across more than one string. It doesn't have to be all 6, but more than one string, and then you put a shape, a chord shape, underneath that. And there are a lot of bar chords out there. We're going to talk about 4 of the most common ones, the most common shapes, that is. They're based off of open chords. Every bar chord is based off of its open chord equivalent. And what I have here, what I'm fingering, is an F chord. And if you know your open chords pretty well, you might notice that if I take off the pointer finger, this shape is the same as an E chord. If I move it back 1 fret, that makes it into an E chord. Now, of course, I wouldn't generally play an E chord this way. I would use my pointer, middle, and ring finger. But this is the concept. You take your open chord and move it up 1 fret, and in order to do it properly, you have to bring the zeros with you. All the notes have to move parallel. So you refinger the chord using the other 3 fingers, and then flatten your pointer finger across the 1st fret to carry this string and the bottom 2 strings, the 1st and 2nd strings, with the rest of the chord, and then they all move parallel. And that's your F chord. Now, some advice on how to play this, because this can be very tricky. It's a lot of squeezing, and a lot of people find themselves cramping up in this area of your hand. And the way to avoid that is, well, there's a few ways. The first is to not play it here. The resistance from the nut pushing the string off of the frets makes it so that the 1st fret is actually the most difficult place physically to push down the string. So if you move this chord up the neck a little bit, it actually becomes a lot easier to play. And the chord should sound good just about anywhere you play it, but what you might be noticing is that it's no longer an F chord. It's only an F chord on the 1st fret. So when you move the shape, it follows the notes of the top string, and you can end up, if you memorize those notes, you end up being able to play every major chord with this one shape. This is a G chord, for instance, because the note that I'm playing on the top string is G. The same as this chord here. But it's a different voicing, is what they call it. Somewhere around the 5th to 7th fret, depending on the size of your hand, you'll reach a sweet spot where the frets are nicely spaced so that your fingers can reach all of the notes comfortably, and you're far enough away from the 1st fret that your pointer finger can hold down those strings a little bit more easily. Now, the word easy doesn't belong anywhere near bar chords, and I want to give you another piece of advice on how to get that 1st finger to hold down those strings. And in order to do that, I'm going to take you to science class for a second. I'm going to brace with my right elbow on the back of the body of the guitar, the front of the guitar. I'm going to brace like this, and then instead of squeezing extra hard between my pointer and my thumb, I'm going to pull backwards with my left hand towards my body this way. And what that does is it creates a fulcrum with your body. So right about here on the other side of the guitar, I'm dividing the pressure between this hand pulling backward and my elbow bracing it. And that allows you to push down all the strings without actually having to squeeze with your thumb at all. Now, in doing so, I've actually knocked the strings out of tune a little bit, but it does save you a lot of pressure on the thumb. Now, you can see my thumb isn't even on the guitar. And I have all 6 of those notes ringing out just like that. Now, if I move this back down to the 1st fret, I'm going to take my middle finger, I'm just going to take it off. I'm going to use it to reinforce what my 1st finger is doing. So now my F chord is an F minor chord. So if you keep your middle finger in place and you base this chord off of the E, you end up with all of the major chords riding all the way up the neck. If you leave your middle finger off and use it to reinforce your 1st finger, you end up with all the minor chords going up the neck. And of course, the 1st finger has to hold down 4 of the 6 strings now instead of 3. So it's a little more work for the 1st finger, but you're also doubling it up with the middle finger. So we're going to do something else here too. If I take this whole shape and I move it down a string, so I'm only covering the bottom 5 strings with my pointer finger, and my pointer finger is actually only holding down the 1st string and the 5th string. It doesn't have to hold down any of the other strings because the other fingers are holding them down for it. It gives your finger a little bit of rest on the bar. Now I have what's called a B flat minor chord. And that is going to allow me to play some of the chords that I might have to reach too high up here to play. If you get to around the 10th or 12th fret, those chords become awfully difficult to reach. So if you move them down a string, you get the notes on the 5th string as well, instead of just the notes on the 6th string. So the B flat is the 1st fret note. And if I finger the A minor shape, you'll notice it's the same as the E shape, but it's down a string. If I finger the A minor shape underneath that bar, now I have a B flat minor chord. And again, I can move that up to wherever I need it. Here it's a D minor. Here it's an E minor. Here's F minor. So we have 2 different ways to play all of our minor chords. And then, of course, if you're extrapolating here, you can probably gather that if I change this note into an A major shape, we end up with all the major chords a second time. So here's B flat major, here's C major, here's D major. Just to compare it to the open chord we did earlier, you can see they sound very similar. And it's this last shape that I want to talk about for just 1 second. You can actually cheat on this shape a little bit, the same way I did with the A chord. If you take your pointer finger and just cover the 5th string, and then take another finger and flatten it across the next 3 strings, you end up with that same B flat chord in what might be an easier way to play it. I don't know if it's easiest for everybody, but if you can do both, this is the easier way for sure. And again, you just mute that bottom string by keeping this finger a little bit curled off the back end. And that gives you the same notes that you have for a lot of the open chords. So those are the tricks to playing bar chords. There's one more thing I want to talk about before we move on though. And I want to give you an exercise so that you can try this at home and work on bar chords without just having to get frustrated and squeeze extra hard. We're going to go to the 5th fret, and I'm going to play what's called an A minor pentatonic scale. Now, if you don't know what that is, we've talked about it before briefly, but you're going to start on the 5th fret of the top string and go 5, 8, and then 5, 7 across the next 3 strings. And then the bottom 2 are also 5 and 8 again. Now, playing that scale the way I just played it won't help you with bar chords, but since every string has a 5th fret in it, you can bar the 5th fret and try playing that scale. It's not the most practical thing to do in a song, but it will definitely help your pointer finger gain the strength that it takes to hold down all 6 strings, and it will help your other fingers gain the dexterity that it takes to form the shape underneath a flattened finger. So hopefully that helps you guys play bar chords. All right, now it's time for our lick of the week, and this week we have something extra special. We're going to bring in our producer and the creator of the guitar department, Mr. Bryce Jarrett. Please welcome Bryce, everybody.
So here's a blues lick that introduces some new elements to it. Last week you were introduced to the blues, and here's a lick in G, G7, and this introduces a major third, which would be a B in the key of G. A normal, your straight up blues scale would be in G. So we're going to introduce a major note to it. And we're also going to introduce the 6th, or if it were, if you were playing a chord, you'd call it a 13, which would be an E. So we're going to introduce something like that to give it a little bit more of a jazz tonality to it, or it works for country also. So it works on a lot of levels. So here's the lick. And that last part is a real cliche thing that you'll hear a lot of guitar players do, just a lot of musicians in general. So it's broken up into two phrases. So you have that first phrase, and then you have your second phrase. And a phrase is just simply going from point A to point B with some tension and resolution. It's based off of essentially just that sliding up to the third, so you're playing that blues note, making it major, and then resolving it. So that's like the most basic lick for a lot of players. So then what I'm doing is I'm adding, sliding up. So again, that sort of adding the tension and almost resolution, but not quite. And then adding to finish it off. And this is kind of a unique thing that I picked up from one of my first guitar instructors. This is done a lot in country, and Pat Metheny does it a lot, and sax players do this a lot, where you can play a note. If you hear how they're the same note, but they have a different timbre. So it almost sounds like you're playing two different notes, even though you're playing the same note. And that whole sliding up, that's a real common thing. So it's really this kind of tonality is what we're looking at. So it's just adding tension. So, and then the last part of the lick is a real common phrase, real cliche phrase, where you're taking this note and bending up to that third. You could play it, I suppose. I always just bend it, so that's why I can't play it right now. So it's just, that's basically it. You're bending it. And then, and ending on the third. So that's something a lot of times in the blues, and especially when it comes to country and jazz blues bass stuff, you want to target those type of what we call guide tones. So there you could hear the whole blues progression just by playing two notes. So that's, hey, the lick of the week.
All right, now it's time for us to enter the tone zone with our pedal of the week. And this week we've got a little bit of an extension of our pedal of the week. We've got the Blues Driver and the DS1, the distortion pedal that we've talked about previously, and our pedal of the week is the Dunlop Crybaby wah pedal. Now, this is an extra special pedal. This is probably the most iconic pedal in all of rock music, and here's why. Just about every guitar player has owned one of these or used one of them. The wah came out in around 1965, 1966, and it just changed everything. Jimi Hendrix really took over the world with the wah pedal. And the way it works, it just modulates your signal when you click it on by you tapping your foot and manipulating the lever here back and forth, and that gives you this sound. So if I push it all the way down, it's what they call wide open. It's as bright or as trebly as it's going to get. And if I bring it back, step onto my heel, it's what they call closed, or as dark as it can get. And it really changed everything in rock music, because then you could control your EQ in real time. And it was just used all over the map. It especially was prevalent in funk music back in the 60s and 70s. But you hear it all over the place. You hear it all the way through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even today. And the Crybaby is just the most iconic of all of the wah pedals. Anybody who has ever used a wah pedal has used a Crybaby. And even the people who don't like the Crybaby, who prefer a different type of wah pedal, they like that pedal generally because they didn't like the Crybaby. They've tried one out. And that's really the staple here, is that this pedal has been all over the place. And so right now I'm running it with a dry signal. So if I click it off, that's what the guitar sounds like. Plugged directly into the amp, I click it back on. And we still are just running the signal straight into the amp through the wah pedal. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on my modded out blues driver pedal. And so again, without the wah, that would give you this sound. If I click the wah on, you can tell it just adds a little more texture. And that really brings solos to life when you're up in these screaming high sections. You can hold out a note and still have it sort of move on you. And that's with an overdrive pedal. If I switch it back to our classic distortion pedal, the DS1, here it is without the wah on. And here it is with the wah clicked back on. The Crybaby Wah by Dunlop, one of the most iconic pedals of all time, and it is our pedal of the week. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Guitar Department. I've been your host, Joe Alton. I want to thank Riemann Music for giving us a place to shoot our show and for supplying this beautiful Starcaster that I've been playing on this whole time. Join us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Guitar Department. I want to thank Bryce Jarrett, our producer, and our guest star this week. I want to thank Pat and Jason, our cameramen, and please join us next time right here on The Guitar Department.